So, welcome to the 7th episode of the FAQCrew GM chat. I have a new guest who will introduce himself now.
Hi, I am Chris Paul. I've at Sizzlork on Twitter. Been DMing for quite a while now. Started playing Dungeons and Dragons shortly after the first edition was put out in Little Blue Book. So I've been DMing since about 1977. Starting with very small groups and working up and getting more folks involved. Spread out from D&D to do Shadowrun and some White Wolf stuff and Hunters campaigns and all kinds of interesting things. Currently running a campaign on Saturday mornings on Twitch called The Brunch Bunch. We get up early and start playing at 8 Eastern time on Twitch. So.
Yeah, getting up early for D&D. I know that.
Beats getting up early for work.
Absolutely. Any day of the week. Okay, so you already answered my first question, how you got into, well, you said with what you got into role-playing and DMing. What drew you to it?
So, basically, it was a neighbor who originally got the introductory. You could go up to 3rd level with that edition. Wow. So we started goofing around one summer, playing with it, and just as I learned, what stories you could tell with this and create characters and explore things, I just kind of fell in love with it and never looked back.
Great. And did you start DMing out of necessity or because you wanted to do it?
Probably both. It was very much a necessity, as there were 2 of us, and we had to alternate back and forth for DM, so we both got to play. Occasionally, his younger brother would join us, and we would have actually 3 players, or 2 players and a DM. But that pretty much necessitated that if we both wanted to play, and it was kind of a case of one person would play and DM at the same time, so they had their PC going through it as well. So I had a wizard, and he was a bard, if I correct, or some sort of a fighter. I can't remember. It was back when bard was a fighter. So yeah, and then once school started that fall, I fell in with a group of folks who played on a regular basis every week through the next 4, 5, 6 years at various times, and it was a great time.
Yeah, sounds like it. So, as somebody who has actually experienced most editions of D&D, I guess, how do you see the development? What do you like? What don't you like? What do you miss?
Actually, I really, really enjoyed the new 5th edition. As a matter of fact, I played, like I said, 1st edition. I've got the Blackmore book sitting over there somewhere, pre that even. Really enjoyed AD&D when it came out, 2nd edition. Yeah. That's probably what I've played the most of over the years. Played a little bit of 3.5. Skipped 4. Actually, about the time 3 came out, I started doing a lot of other RPGs and kind of set D&D aside for a while. But now 5's out, and I'm really loving the mechanics and the speed and the depth you can get out of it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But I started with 3.5, so
okay.
I'm not in D&D that long, actually. All right. So in your current campaign, The Brunch Bunch, I think you use a homebrewed world. Is that right?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I don't think I have ever actually run a module or a pre-built world at any point. As I mentioned, one of the things that hooked me into D&D was that whole storytelling and building, and even when I wasn't DMing, I would take hours and days just designing maps and NPCs and putting them together into interesting worlds, because that was the stuff I found that was fun.
Okay, so how do you go about building, or how did you go about building the current world?
So I started out with a regional map. It's a coastline. I guess you could probably equate it somewhat to the Sword Coast region in Forgotten Realms. Yeah. We've got a confederacy where all the races get along well and things like that. And there's some backstory about the human nation above them that's more imperialistic, and over time the Confederacy formed to defend themselves from this imperialistic nation. And that was 1,200 years ago. So I just kind of build this, and it's not fully fleshed by any means. I get ideas and kind of put them in, and then I'll go back and fill them in later. Once that's done, I create a couple of cities that I know I want to use early on. So it's kind of working in both directions. So come up with a local area they can play in, but I know where it sits in a larger context.
Yeah, great. Okay, and did your players have any, or do players have influence on the world building process, either by their backstories or the ideas they have before the game starts, or during the game because of what they do?
Absolutely. Before we started, my direction to my players was that there was a spring festival every year in a city called Eaglewood, and here it is on the map. Let's find a reason for you to be traveling there.
Nice.
So by doing that, we began to explore where the characters were coming from. We worked on the backstory of a lot of them, and they know where their parents are and their lives, and their dad was a dwarf and he lived here, and his job is over here, and here's where he works. And we build out that backstory as much as as much as they feel comfortable to do so, and enough so that I have those little plot hooks that I can tie into to help with the story.
Okay, so how would you describe your current campaign you're running? What type is it? Where's the focus? Is it combat, exploration, role playing? What do you want it to be?
I want a good balance, because I know a lot of players rather, really enjoy that focus on combat. We've got the half-orc barbarian and things like that. In order to get it balanced, I go back and forth generally, or try and set up one encounter of each type. For a few weeks in a row, they were doing your basic dungeon crawl, going through caverns and dealing with undead, and there was a whole lot of combat in there. Since then, we've come out in the past few weeks. They've met some locals. I mentioned beforehand, we brought our half-orc to tears today. And that was simply by giving her a home to belong to in this village.
Wow.
She had been an outcast from her tribe, and the party had managed to save a couple of these villagers. And they came back and made connections there. And as they were leaving on their journey, the shaman in charge of the village just presented her and announced that she was now forever part of this tribe. And so got to pull those moments in as well. That really drives me as much as combat, but I try and keep a balance for my players.
Okay. How much time do you spend preparing?
Usually I spend about twice the amount of time on play in prep work. All right. Because I do a lot of prep work I know I'm going to have to throw away. Or at least postpone. I enjoy a sandbox where the characters can go off and do anything they want to. Today there was an encounter that was completely optional, but I had to build it out as if they were going to do it. They could have gone a completely different direction, so I tend to over-prepare.
Okay, and you comparing sitting around the table, having battle maps, and doing it on Roll20, where do you see the differences?
That's a good question. They both have their strengths. One of the things I like about Roll20 is it tends to... the players tend to be a little more engaged. Okay. Sometimes when we're sitting around a character and sitting around a table and I'm dealing with a couple of players, a lot of times there's sidebar conversations that take place that can be distracting or something like that. With an online Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, you're using the same channel, so there's no side talk. which keeps it more focused on the game. And yet today, when I was dealing with a couple of the players, the rest were typing in chat and going back and forth and doing their character progression without me while I was dealing with the plot. And then I can just go back and scroll back and catch up and answer their questions. And I really like it that way, from that respect. In person, around a table, which is where I've done most of my gaming over the years. I really enjoy the camaraderie, the energy you get from that situation, and of course the snacks everybody brings.
Yes. Okay. Well, yeah, I find I tend to improvise like crazy every time I DM. It's just what I do. I don't prepare that much. And I find it I find it harder on Roll20 because you have the map. Well, the map creation process is a bit more difficult, I think.
Yep.
Instead of just taking a marker to a match, you have to think about what you're doing. And I feel maybe it's the way I do it, that it's a bit more railroaded. But maybe it's the way I do it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. One of the things I do is I tend to draw up a lot of my maps on paper and then scan them in and use those on Roll20.
That's a good idea.
Just because it is so difficult. There's few times I've had to create things on the fly. I'll either just grab a generic map for a background off of the Roll20, what they provide. Or being an artist, I have a graphics tablet, so I can quick go in, draw the scenery as I would on an in-person battle map and move on. One of the things I've started to do with these last few bits, especially I had my characters going, or my players going through the cavern system I mentioned. And it's the first time I ever used the dynamic lighting in Roll20. And I got to admit, I didn't know how valuable it was until I actually tried to use it. Set up cone of vision for my players for about 200 degrees so they can only see the front facing of their tokens. Blocked out where all the caverns were, and because I had drawn it on paper, it was not a dungeon grid. It was not on a grid at all. It was just completely random cavern system. And seeing these guys, how their play changed just by doing that, how they began to really sneak and peek around corners, how they go into a room and look all the way around. We had one situation where they walked into a room, saw 5 undead off in one corners, and the rest of the party was, screaming that they were in trouble, and the barbarian goes, "Oh, it's only 5. What's the problem?" And then the player spun the token around and saw that there were 13 more behind them.
Great.
And the look of the face and the shock, it just was priceless. And that's even if I had had an inboard game and suddenly whipped out a dozen more minis and put them on I don't think it would have had the reaction that we got there.
Probably. I have to try to get into that thing. I'm very basic in my use of Roll20.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I do spend so much time prepping on Roll20. I mean, it's probably I do more prepping there than I ever did for any in-person game, just to take advantage of everything that it has, preset some macros so I can have the game flow a little faster, things like that. That doesn't mean that I can't, improv like the shambling mound that came up the other day that I had no idea about.
I saw that. That was great.
It was fun. But that was completely a last-minute decision that, hey, we needed something at this part of the story. Let's do something.
Okay. So, do you have any influences on your DMing style you would acknowledge, or did you just go from the beginning?
Coming in so early, there weren't a whole lot of examples. Even the first couple of conventions you went to, they were all the wargaming miniatures set up with the ranks and ranks of army figures. and then D&D was maybe off in the corner, even during those conventions. But staying and watching. I mean, this golden age that we're living in, where I can flip on Twitch and watch Matt Mercer and Perkins and all these guys who have made a career basically out of these skills. There's really an opportunity to learn there, and I try and just pick up whatever I can from whomever. Still not good on falling into that many characters. It takes me a moment to drum those up. I can't just fall into them, but this is what I'm working on now.
Nice. Okay. And in your games, especially now in 5e, how do you handle PC deaths?
It is a part of life. I try not to pull too many punches. If I would rather, and maybe this is just me, I would rather shave a few hit points off of a damage roll and make it interesting than have some sort of Deus Ex Machina. We're going to have the golden light come down and revive this first level character, just so the player doesn't have to re-roll one. And again, I realize there's different ways. What probably informs that for me is it in those early days, and when I was learning to DM and everything, I saw a lot of those Monty Hall campaigns where actions never had consequences. Okay. Treasure was abundant. We're going to go in. We're a bunch of murder hobos. We're going to destroy this. We're going to take all the money. We're going to go home. We're going to buy cool stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can do that. And maybe as a reaction or overreaction to that, I tend to run mine a little grittier than that. Certainly in the days. We had in the early days we had a lot of that going on where death was never permanent and the gods came down and bestowed you with wishes and gifts, and we had one player and she wanted a psionic warhorse, and it's a great character. She was running two quick characters basically, a druid and a psionic warhorse. Great pair. Loved them as characters, but looking back, that was probably a little OP for what we were doing.
Yeah.
And all of the guys, I singled that out because it was probably the best example of it as far as how it worked out. But there were some that didn't work out as well, from that. So
yeah, consequences should be a thing.
Yeah. And so again, I tend to run it a little more grittier, and if you die, we live in a world, we create these worlds, and death is everywhere. So if we're gonna save this PC, that needs to be a heroic adventure in itself.
Yeah. For
it to mean something.
Yeah. So I really like what Matt Mercer does with his resurrection rules.
Everybody gets to contribute and everybody gets to help.
But it's not an automatic success. Like the spells actually, if you read them in the player's handbook, it's like, okay, so you can. He's dead 200 years. All the body parts are there, so just zap and he's back. Yeah, I think it should be more than that. Well, last session I actually did the Deus Ex Machina thing for a player character, but they now owe a being of fairy 3 favors. Yeah. So
again, you got the consequences in there.
Oh yes. and I know what they are.
And by the time they get done, it's like, well, we could have just left him dead.
Yeah. What if
that was an option? The next time this comes up, we're going to have a hard think.
They actually said that today.
Well done, sir. Well done.
Thank you. Okay. So now to one of my favorite parts. I'd like you to tell me a favorite DM and a favorite PC anecdote.
Oh, it's only recently I've been doing a lot of PC playing. Let's see. Actually, probably my favorite PC moment. It wasn't D&D, and it wasn't even a PC moment. It was something else. So we were running a vampire hunters game.
Yeah.
and I had a character who was a sniper. Based it loosely off of a character from a Tom Clancy novel.
Yeah.
And we were running around shooting all these vampires and destroying them and having a great time as we saved Memphis from the underworld. And about that time, or shortly thereafter, the TV show Numbers came out, or it was out.
Okay.
And in that, they had Lou Diamond Phillips playing a sniper that got called into certain the episodes. And one of my players pinged me after the first episode he was in and goes, "Hey, Chavez is on TV." And it was kind of cool to have developed this character enough so that it was, representative of the world it would have lived in, and the character would have lived in, and enough so that it was recognizable when somebody else did something similar as a television program. So that was really cool. The funniest story I have from a DM standpoint wasn't even mine.
Okay.
And the reason I love it so much is A, it's funny, and B, because it shows what happens when players really understand the game, not the game, but the situations they find themselves in. So many times we, even if trying not to, we metagame and think tactically and everything. And there was an episode where most of the players were outside, except for one character who was still inside a hut. And again, I think it was like zombie squirrels or just some ridiculous thing. And the DM who was running it was just doing it, and you get bit, and and things happen, you fall in fire, and you're running across, and just all this insanity is going on. And then the character who's in the hut walks outside, and the DM reiterates everything you've just seen. Straight face, looks at the DM, and goes, "I walk back in the hut."
Yeah.
Again, it's those moments, and we all have them, where your players just really understand what the situation is and respond appropriately. Oftentimes it means doing something that doesn't progress the plot necessarily. It's these really good character moments. I'll use one for my game today. I mentioned our half work, and they get to this village and everything, and my Kim, or plays Verge, our half work barbarian, just types in chat and goes, "Can I carve a rock this evening?" I'm like, "Absolutely." And she makes a roll on performance and how well it comes out and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And and then she stops and visits with that village shaman the next day and gives it to her. And she had, as a half-orc, she knows one word. She knows how to write one word. It's her name. And she had scribbled it on this rock and was giving it to the shaman as a way to remember her.
That's cool.
And the reason I love that is because that was what I needed. Okay? Because then that's when the shaman could take off her own necklace with the beads and the stones and the claws and put it around Verge's neck and declare her a member of their tribe now and forever. And again, it didn't progress the plot. We may get back to it, we may not back. She may never find this part of the world again because they're thousands of miles from home.
Yeah.
From where they started, I should say.
Yeah.
But it was that little bit, that character interaction. It was her taking the initiative to carve a stone that allowed me as a DM to do something special that really, really meant something to these characters. Yeah. And those are the moments I strive for. Killing dragons is fun. I love doing it.
Yep.
But it's those little things that mean a lot to me as a DM.
Yeah. Okay. So to wrap this up, any advice to DMs or people who might want to be a DM someday? The anybody can DM. All you have to do is be passionate about it. Learn some rules. More importantly, know where to find the rules when you forget what they are.
so you can keep the game moving. Anybody can do that. It's great fun. I encourage everybody to at least try it and see if you like it. The things that help me personally be a good DM, if I am indeed a good DM, be well read. Not only in fiction and things to draw your plots from, be well read in the areas of physics and science and the sciences. So when something happens, you as a DM have to describe physics. You have to describe what happens. You have to describe what happens when you get a fire bolt on one side and an ice bolt on the other side of the same thing. And if you become familiar enough with these things to be able to say, okay, yeah, it cracks, it falls in half. Yeah, great. But if you can describe in detail how it fissures and cracks and expands and, and becomes more than just a thing happens, that's when you begin to draw people into your stories. And again, you don't have to be a scientist. You just have to understand the basics of life around you. Pay attention. Today, one of my passions is survival. Being able to go out in the woods and do stuff. Yeah. Today in our game, we were traipsing through the jungle, and I had a few moments with a couple of the players where I could share that knowledge. Fun stuff. Yeah. And we had a moment where we sat and we talked about how you track how the predator is moving through the jungle based on where the birds are and what they're doing. When they go quiet, it's because they're hiding from a predator.
Yeah.
So you know it. You know where the predator is by where the noise isn't.
Yeah.
And things like that. It's just stuff. It's just a lifetime of a passion for learning and reading, and this is where I get to bring that all together in DMing. Is to bring that all together and do some awesome stuff with it, tell some stories, and hang out with friends.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Chris. That was a great talk. And,
happy to do it.
Sizzlorg on Twitter, and the Brunch Bunch games are streamed and on YouTube. I'll link that in the description so people can check out the horror you put your players through.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
All right.